Hey kids, welcome back. So we're talking about Joseph, and I want you to turn to Genesis chapter 40. We're going to be doing verses 40 through 45. So go ahead and turn there. While you're turning there, I want you to think of 3 things that happened to Joseph during this time. 3 things, when we've been learning for the past couple of weeks about Joseph, 3 things you can remember that happened to Joseph. I want you guys to discuss it at home. So 3 things. Let's talk about Joseph's past that we've been going over. First of all, we have the dream. Joseph had a dream that his brothers were going to bow in front of him. And I don't think his brothers really liked that. And we know that because they all got together and threw him in a pit. Next, then we have, they took him out of the pit, sold him to slavery, and he was on his way to Egypt. He then became Potiphar's second in command, and he kind of worked his way up to that position. And we know that God had orchestrated all of this. He was in the orchestration of what was happening with Joseph. Next, he was second in command for Potiphar, and he was the overseer. So he was in charge of all that Potiphar had. And this is important because as we go through the life of Joseph, we realize that this was something that was helping him for the future that God had planned for him. So then he was put into prison. For 2 years, he stayed in prison. He had the cupbearer and the baker put into prison at one point, and they had dreams that he had foretold and explained what was happening in their dreams. Then, after a time, the cupbearer finally told the Pharaoh, because the Pharaoh had a dream also, that while the cupbearer was in prison, there was this man named Joseph that had told his dream. So he told the Pharaoh ordered that Joseph be taken out of prison, and he wanted for him to tell what was going on in his dreams. He had 2 dreams, by the way, and both of those dreams were a prediction of what was going to happen to the land of Egypt. After Joseph told the Pharaoh's dreams, he then was put into a high position at the Pharaoh's household. And looking back on Joseph's life, we realize that all of these circumstances, he's been put in a high commanding position through everything. God was orchestrating all of this during this time. Do you think Joseph could do this job of overseer in Pharaoh's house? God had been teaching him in 2 other jobs, in Potiphar's house and in prison, how to be a good overseer. God had been plans for Joseph, and he was getting Joseph ready for the very important job that he would have in Egypt. Now, I'm going to have Kais read one of the promises that God delivers to us in Psalms, chapter 34, verse 17.
So today I'm reading Psalms 34:17. It says, "When the righteous cry for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles."
Thanks, Kais. God blessed Joseph in Egypt. He was a very important man in Egypt. Only Pharaoh was more powerful than he was. Joseph married and had children. Let's do a sword drill. Some of you might know how to do this with your Bibles. We're going to turn to Genesis 41:51. Go ahead and turn there, and I'll read it. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my hardships and all my father's house." And then in Genesis 41, chapter 41, verse 52, it says, "The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." God didn't forget his promises to Joseph, and he was continuing on completing those promises. Let me ask you a question. Can anyone find a promise that God proved true in Joseph's life? The promise is found in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. There was a famine just as foretold in Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh had two dreams. One of them was about the drought that was going to happen in the land, and they were going to not have food. The second dream was about the plenty that they were going to have in the land. And so it was Joseph's job to, while they were in the 7 years of plenty, to save up all of the food and the resources that they had in order to get through the 7 years that were going to be famine and they weren't going to have food. And so Joseph was in charge of that, and God had put him there. Now, Joseph was in charge of the rationing of the food also. And so when his father ran out of resources, they were experiencing famine, they didn't have a lot of food, they were looking for somewhere to get food and knew that Egypt was the place that they would find the food they needed. So Joseph's father sent for his sons to go to Egypt and ask for food. Little did they know that this is where Joseph had ended up. And even when they were in the room with him asking for the food they needed, didn't realize that it was Joseph who they were asking. And then we remember back to the dream that he had had probably 30 years before of his brothers bowing down to him. And we see the reality of what God was showing him in his dreams, that his brothers were going to be asking him for food, and he didn't bear grudges. He wasn't angry at his brothers or telling them that he wasn't going to do anything for them. He remembered that this is what God had planned. So in Genesis 45, 5 through 8, we kind of get a picture of what is going on here at this time. "And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his household, and ruler over all the land." And Genesis 50:20 says, "For as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So here Joseph realizes what is going on. It's not the fact that he should be angry at his brothers, but that he should be looking forward to what God is doing in his life and around him, through him. God has planned in sending Joseph to Egypt. He had already planned all of that. He knew it was going to happen. God accomplished his purpose, and we are part of that plan. We see only a little part of what God is doing. Like Joseph only saw a little snips here and there of what God was doing. When something happens to us, our attitude should be, I wonder what God is up to. God always has a plan, and He is always making His plan work out. I'm going to have Addison read Isaiah 14:24 for you. The Lord of hosts has sworn.
The Lord's host has sworn.
As I have planned.
As I have planned.
So shall it be.
So shall it be.
As I have purposed.
As I have purposed.
So shall it stand.
So shall it stand.
Isaiah 14:24.
Isaiah 14:24. 24.
Thank you, Addison. Now let's go over the main ideas here. God has a plan for each person and works to fulfill it. And God always accomplishes his plans and works out his eternal purposes. I want you guys to think about those things this week, and I want you to take and read through this book in Genesis chapter 40 through 45, and you can get a better glimpse at all the details that God puts in his word. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.